Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Shedeur Sanders will make his NFL debut tomorrow against the Las Vegas Raiders, and we talked so much Shedeur Sanders this past offseason, have not done it since, and now he's making his first ever NFL start, and I think it's going to go good. I think Shedeur Sanders, I thought he was a first-round quarterback. I thought the Giants should have taken him, and then I thought the Raiders should have taken him at number 6. Then I thought the Steelers should have taken him. I still think Shedeur Sanders is a first-round talent. Now that we're into November, however many months since he got drafted to Cleveland, I can understand why some people thought Shedeur Sanders was a second-round quarterback, mainly due to just kind of pocket presence, lack of, I don't want to say mobility or agility, because I don't think that's what I'm trying to say, but my point here is I think Shedeur Sanders is a really good quarterback, or I think he was going to be a really good quarterback, and then he ends up going all the way at the end of the draft to Cleveland, and they drafted Dillon Gabriel in, what was it, the 3rd round. So my take when that happened was they reached on Dillon Gabriel, and that really screwed Shedeur Sanders' hope. Now, thankfully, Joe Flacco ends up getting traded to Cincinnati. Deshaun. What else? Kenny Pickett's a backup QB. I feel like I'm missing a quarterback. And then Dillon Gabriel ends up getting concussed. I don't want this to be a Dillon Gabriel slander video, but I do think it's evident and apparent, whether we're looking at preseason tape, whether we're looking at Oregon tape, or we're looking at just like his 5 or so starts with the Cleveland Browns. I think Dillon Gabriel's a backup QB. And so for the first time in Shedeur Sanders' career, he is an underdog. And he's actually now a likable underdog. Pretty much everybody, is going to be rooting for Shedeur tomorrow against Las Vegas. And I do think you'll see bad sacks. I do think you'll see a bad interception or two. Or maybe just a couple of bad throws. And if it ends up getting intercepted, I would probably wager Shedeur does throw an interception. But interceptions are not the end of the world, as we've seen time and time again. Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, whatever. But I think it's going to go good. And our original take was that I thought Shedeur was going to be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns in Week 6. And I didn't think he was going to lose that starting spot for the rest of the season. So now, what is it, Week 11, Week 12? I honestly don't think Shedeur will lose the starting gig. But I guess, it still remains to be seen. So, folks, welcome back to the channel. We're obviously talking about Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns in today's video. Hit that like button, hit that sub button if you haven't already. I'm like running out of breath talking about Shedeur Sanders here. So I've got a couple of statistics. In his final season at Colorado, he threw 37 touchdowns, 4,134 yards, completed 74 of his passes. And then last weekend against the Baltimore Ravens, 4 of 16, 47 yards, interception, a fumble, 2 sacks, and a 13.5 pass rating. Now, I don't think you can knock a backup QB who's never gotten first-team reps. Obviously, he's a backup QB. He's not going to be getting first-team reps. He had a quote, I can't think of the center's name, or rather, I can't pronounce the center's name. We don't make too many Browns videos over here on this channel, which hit that like button if you guys want to see more. But he had a quote about never throwing a ball to Jerry Jeudy, or he was wondering if he had ever thrown a football to Jerry Jeudy, and I think that's very important. I think practice reps and reps in general with who you're supposed to be playing with is a big deal. So now he's had a whole week of practice. They've had a whole week of install. They've had a whole week of film. They're in a, Shedeur and the Browns offense, they're in a much better situation than obviously just kind of coming in for a filling in for Dillon Gabriel once he got down with that concussion. Now, I went back and watched a ton of Shedeur film before we made this video because I was reading an athletic article, I forget who the writer was, and he was saying, Shedeur looked good in preseason, he looked good in training camp, and then he looked good in the first couple of games of preseason, and then in his final start in the preseason, it was clear that Shedeur Sanders was not starting quarterback material. And, I watched that game in August, whenever it was. Sorry, I'm having some throat issues here. When you go back and you watch that tape in Shedeur's final preseason game, nobody was open ever. Ever. Nobody was open ever. Like, seriously, go back, watch it. Nobody was open ever. All right? And the media take was, he's clearly not ready. I'm watching this, and I'm like, he's playing with like third, fourth stringers. He's playing with guys who are about to get cut. Nobody is freaking open. What the hell is he supposed to do? So I think a good comparison for Shedeur Sanders, and I heard this somewhere, is Derek Carr. Derek Carr, many moons ago, was a second-round quarterback. He had a heck of an arm, and he had some mobility. And I think Shedeur Sanders is very similar, where the dude's arm talent is insane. It reminds me of when Bo Nix got drafted 2 years ago, and people were trying to tell me and everybody that Bo Nix does not have a strong arm. Bo Nix can't throw the deep ball. He does not have a NFL-ready arm. That's clearly been disputed, and I think the same thing applies for Shedeur. You know, I read back to analysts' views on Shedeur, and first off, they're always first or second round graded. I've never seen a mock draft where Shedeur Sanders went where he went. I've never seen a mock draft where Shedeur Sanders went out of the second round. So he's got a heck of an arm, but he does take some bad sacks. And you saw it in that Baltimore game, and you saw it in preseason, and I think it is a result of his offensive line at Colorado. Now, I've had some family members go to Colorado, and they love Boulder football, and obviously we were watching a lot of Colorado football last year with Shedeur, Dion, Travis Hunter, a bunch of NFL prospects, Jimmy Horn, and the offensive line was that bad. You know, it really was. You hear these NFL guys or these, scouts, draft experts, whatever, and they say Shedeur had a bad offensive line. If you want to, I implore you to go watch it. It was that bad. His offensive line at Colorado was that bad. Now, I don't like calling your offensive line under the bus, but I do think it is not out of the realm of reality that a young kid would, maybe make some comments that, maybe in the future, 10 years from now, you look back on. I'm 26, and it feels like almost every week I make a comment or I say a comment that I'm like, never mind. I was wrong there. And then finally, I think Tom Brady, I've actually got something here. This was from a Athletic excerpt. 25 years ago, Tom Brady, the undisputed GOAT of his craft, threw all of 3 passes as a rookie in New England, where he was inactive for 14 games. Brady said on Logan Paul's podcast in May that he knew Sanders well and texted him a reminder that the 7-time champ was the 199th pick in the 2000 draft. I'm not trying to compare Shedeur Sanders to Tom Brady, but I do think Tom Brady, texting a guy like Shedeur Sanders, who fell where he fell, not all these quarterbacks in that draft are getting texts from Tom Brady. So I think he's got the talent. I do think it's going to be raw. I think you're going to see him take some bad sacks. I think it would take time. If he was starting every game this season, you want to see an evolvement, not taking bad sacks, but looking back at that tape with Cleveland in preseason, looking back at that tape with, Cleveland's missing their tackles, looking back at it at Colorado, it makes sense to me that Shedeur Sanders sometimes takes bad sacks. So I don't think he's going to be perfect, but I do think the Browns will win this football game, and I do think Shedeur Sanders will do enough to get himself at least one more start. So thank you for watching tonight's Riff and Raff. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that like button, hit that sub button if you did. And, that's it from me. Have a great rest of your weekend, and let's go Shedeur Sanders. Peace.